my name is Steve Reeves and I've been asked to judge this month's competition, which has an S-curve theme. I am a local photographer here in the Dallas area. My wife and I run Makeshift Photography, a studio located in the Deep Ellum part of downtown. Our primary focus is fine art photography and printmaking, but we also do a bit of freelance photographic. We are both members of the Dallas Camera Club, and what may be most notable about that is that for the previous 3 years, we coordinated the monthly and end-of-year competitions. During that time, I have overseen the scoring and critique of about 5,000 images and worked with nearly 100 different judges. In the last year or so, I've also had the pleasure of judging for a handful of clubs. Between all of that and competing with my own work, there's not a whole lot that I haven't seen when it comes to camera club competitions. I have a lot of respect and admiration for these types of competitions, and a tremendous amount of credit for my own ability as a photographer is due to my participation in them. One of the greatest joys I've had from working with these competitions is to watch the ability of my fellow club members grow as the months tick by. I hope that my efforts here judging for the Plano Photography Club leads towards that same kind of thing. I try to be fair with the scores and hope that nobody is too upset if they got a low one. If I gave you a high score, please know that in my mind you really earned it. My comments should be taken within the context of competitive photography, and please keep in mind that they are just my thoughts. It's hard to insist that there are rights and wrongs in something as subjective as a visual art. The comments I make are merely my opinions and suggestions based on my own experience as a photographer and how I might approach your image as if it were my own. If you disagree with what I say about your image, that is completely okay. The theme this month has to do with S-curves, which can be a very powerful compositional tool. As I looked through the images, I found several examples that made extremely effective use of the concept. I also saw more than a few where the image might contain some curves, and while some of them were certainly shaped like an S, they somewhat fell short of effectively using the curves to draw you through the image. They say an image is worth 1,000 words, and I believe that tonight's winning images will speak volumes on how an S-curve can be used well in a photograph. We'll start with the beginners group and the image titled Interlaced Fingers, for which I gave a score of 7 points. I do like the inventive nature of this photo and the somewhat zipper pattern formed by the fingers interlocked together. I think what kept me from giving this image a higher score is that the image feels very two-dimensional to me. There's no depth to it, and I think that maybe if the hands had been tilted somewhat away from the camera to lead your eye sort of back and deep into photo, it might have made for a more engaging image overall. I also think that the color seems a little flat, and it seems like most of the time when I see really interesting photos of hands, they tend to be monochrome because the little nooks and crannies and wrinkles that we've got in our hands are accentuated by the monochrome treatment. So you might play around with this image and see if you don't end up something with a little more dynamic nature to it. Up next we have double S-curves, for which I also gave a score of 7. The image is certainly vibrant, the detail looks good. The beaks look a little hot near the eyes, but I don't think they're completely blown, and it looks like there's some good detail there. The necks of these birds obviously form a couple of S-curves, and I think birds sort of represent an easy way to go about finding an S-curve. This image might have scored a little higher if it didn't look a little off-kilter. You can see the line between the shore and the water, and it looks slanted. And it may be that the shore was sort of sloping away from you, but it also looks like maybe the camera was just crooked. It also looks like it's a little too contrasty or maybe too much clarity, at least for my taste, and it gives it sort of a harsh look to it. I think softening it up would really help bring this into a realm where it looks a little more natural, a little more inviting. I think it might also work better as a horizontal photo. Personally, I'm not a big fan of verticals, and so it's got to be a subject matter that really speaks to being vertical for me to appreciate it as a vertical picture. And it might have been as simple as including all of the birds, both the left one and the right one, so that I can see the bird in its completeness. Curvy Path to Heaven is next, for which I also gave a score of 7. It looks like it was an overcast day, or maybe you were out early in the morning, or maybe both, and it looks like the lighting conditions weren't harsh. There's also good sharpness and detail. I can see the individual leaves and the nooks and crannies in the bark, and that's very pleasing. As far as an S-curve goes, it looks like we have a slight S-curve in the tree, and then also maybe the hint of one in the path, neither of which have a strong flowing S-curve nature to them, and I think that was the key point here for why it didn't receive a higher score than it did. Outside of that, though, it's an excellent detail shot, and it was really well made. Next we have Desert Roots, for which I gave a score of 8 points. Here we've got a lot of crunchy detail with the rocks and the cactus and the gnarly tree or tree roots or whatever those happen to be. We certainly have a stronger S-curve here, but unfortunately the entire image has sort of the same contrast from top to bottom, and it becomes kind of difficult to separate the foreground from the middle ground to the background, and has an overall effect of making the image appear very flat. I think if you can go back and revisit this photo and maybe add some separation between your foreground, middle ground, and background, you might also consider a horizontal treatment to this As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a big fan of vertical images, and it might be that this one feels a bit more expansive, and it might give that S-curve somewhere to move into in a more horizontal representation. Next we have Fleur for 8 points. I understand this to be a type of tulip, at least that's what I'm told. There are certainly a lot of curves in here, but I'm not sure I'm seeing which ones are supposed to be the main S curves here that are supposed to lead me through the image. I think this might have missed the mark in terms of the theme. The exposure on the flower, though, is really well done, and it looks like you're either photographing on an overcast day or you had a diffuser with you to kind of cut down the bright sky, even in the morning or evening when you try to photograph flowers. It can be a difficult lighting situation. You were either well prepared or pretty lucky. The detail is really good. The sharpness is good. You can really get a good feel for the twists and curves and flavor of these flowers. I'm afraid I just don't see a real strong S curve here that's represented that meets the theme. Next we have Rorschach Champagne by Lulu Warren, which earned 8 points and 3rd place. There are a few S-curves here. There's some in the background, the shadows on the back of the wall. There's certainly some S-shapes in the curve of the glass. A few S-curves within the inky substance, and the title says champagne, but I don't see bubbles. The image is a little dark for me overall, and I think if that's the artist's intent, then more power to you, and please ignore what I have to say otherwise. I do think, for me, I would prefer at least the liquid and the inky substance in the liquid to be a little brighter. It would add some separation between it and the rest of the image, and a real focal point, possibly, to really bring you to the swirling color within the fluid that's there in the glass. Debbie Kennard's image, Come Sail Away, earns 10 points and 2nd place, and I promise I didn't ding you any points for getting that song stuck in my head. The image does have a strong S-curve, one of the strongest I've seen so far in the beginners group. It starts down in the bottom left corner and sweeps over to the right, back to the left before going out to open sea around the middle of the image. The color in the water is very inviting. There are a couple of things that I think might have helped improve the image, clean up a little bit of some distractions. That sign on the left, maybe cloning that out. There's also a little bit of green something or another poking into the very bottom left corner of the image, and I think that's could just be easily cloned out. 1st place goes to Curves of Yellowstone by Brenda Armstrong, and Brenda, I have to say that your image was certainly the one in the beginners group that gave me the most pause. Certainly captured my imagination. I'm not sure if I could tell that I was looking at cherry cobbler or lava flow, or maybe some geological formation from space. And if you found a way to get up into space to capture this image, then you certainly deserve 1st place. It does have an S-curve that leads you not just across the image, but deep into the image. From the foreground, it curves around and snakes around and leads you deep back into the image, and I think that's a really effective way to use an S-curve, and certainly the alien nature of the environment added to the overall appeal of this image. Congratulations on 1st place. In the intermediate group, we're going to begin with Curved Shadow, which earned 8 points. The image is well exposed, and I like that the detail on the wall is maintained. The shadow is really very interesting, and I like how you've got it pointed straight down in the corner of the frame. The biggest problem here in terms of my judging this is that I really don't see an S-curve almost at all. I kind of see a couple of curves here and there that if you tilt your head and squint your eyes, maybe you can get the letter S out of it, get S shape, but really maybe it looks more like the number 5 or a cursive Z. I really just don't think that there's a strong S curve here that meets the theme, and so I think that's the biggest part of why I didn't score better. I have hammered on a couple of images so far tonight that I didn't think worked well as a vertical image, but I think this one does, and I think you've done well with that. And so outside of the S-curve theme, I do think you've got a strong image here. Certainly something to play around with some more and consider for other uses. Up next we have Complexity, earning 8 points. Here we've got a photograph of an abstract sculpture of some kind. Looks like a large enough sculpture for you to get underneath and shoot up, obviously, towards the sky. The sky looks nice and blue and well handled, and the shadow detail in the darker parts of the underside of this structure also aren't completely blocked up. In fact, there's a lot of good red detail there, so I think if this was an HDR image that you use to marry together a well-exposed sky and the well-exposed underside of the structure, then I think you succeeded in that regard. When it comes to the S-curve, certainly there are plenty of curves here, but I don't really see that any of them represent an S-curve in the spirit of what the theme was looking for as a compositional tool to lead you through the image. Up next is Winter Lane, which I also gave a score of 8 points. Here we definitely have a strong S-curve that leads the eye from the bottom left corner of the image around, curving back from the right in the lower third of the image, and then looping back over and exiting back behind the trees off to the right. So definitely a flowing S-curve through the image, and it certainly is inviting to see so much snow. The image has good detail and good crispness throughout. I do think that the snow in the upper left corner, the highlights may be a little overexposed or blown. I know snow is white and it's hard to really gauge whether that's a loss of photographic detail or simply just the way the snow is. One way or the other, I think that leads to a lack of impact in the upper left quadrant of the image, and I think what keeps the image overall from being a stronger photograph. It might be possible to resolve a lot of this with simple cropping, maybe coming up towards the bottom of the fork in the road, I guess, as it comes in from the left, and cropping out maybe a little bit off the left side of the photo. It might make that tunnel through the trees, through the snowy trees, and on around the corner more inviting to the viewer and to give them more of a sense that they're actually on this path and moving through it. Next we have polo stirrups, a pair of boots, and some horse riding gear laying on a sidewalk. The straps of the spurs do form an S curve, and I guess it could be said that they do lead you from the bottom of the image up towards the top where the boots are. I think it's somewhat contradictory, though. I think the boots are what catch your eye first, and I'm not sure if that same S-curve does such an effective job of drawing you down towards the bottom of the image. The crunchy detail in the leather of the boots, I mean, you can really kind of see the grit and the grime, and you can see that the gear in general is really worn, and that's always an effective attribute in a photo where you've got objects from real life and from an activity that you sort of get a sense of the excitement of that activity here in these boots. I think the composition needs some restructuring, though, to really bring the image home. Striking is well, wait for the pun here, a very striking image that I gave 9 points to. This image is one of several snakes that showed up in this month's competition, and I think that snakes have certainly S-curves all around them. I think we can all picture a snake in our head and immediately see the letter S in the alphabet. I'm not sure, though, that we've got a real strong sense of the letter S here in this picture. I'll stop with the hissing now, I suppose. Aside from that, we do have a good, clear indication of the scales and the contrast and the dark lines and the light green nature of the snake, and we've got a couple of catch lights in his eye, which are always pleasing in photographs of animals. And so I do think that even despite the grain and some of the out-of-focus areas in the foreground, that this actually is a pretty good action shot of this animal, and I think he handled the exposure well. I think that maybe it didn't quite tackle the S-curve, though, as well as it might have, certainly given a snake's ability to form the letter S. Rainbow Bridge is next with 9 points. The S-curve in this image is obvious and well played and well represented in the image, and I think the architect of this bridge probably had S-curves in mind when they were planning the bridge. The shadow detail on the underside of the bridge is well handled, and the blacks don't appear to be blocked up, and that's well handled. The highlights also look to be well handled, and it looks like your aperture was nice and small, f22 probably or above, to give you a starburst effect on the lights. That's pleasing in these blue hour shots. The perspective on the buildings in the background are a little troublesome. The shore is angling a little bit away from you, and I'm not sure if that's contributing to making the overall image appear not crooked, but askew, I guess is a good word. And I understand that the bridge itself looks to be askew, and you've got sort of an upward angle, and that actually may work well in terms of the overall composition. I don't think the bridge being wonky is a distracting factor, but I do believe that those buildings on the far shore, their wonkiness may be an element that could be handled better. And I'll go ahead and say this because I know I see this in my own images, and I hate each and every one of them every time they pop up, and they are real easy to fix, and it's sensor spots. You can see a few of them in the clouds underneath the bridge, and maybe a few in the upper right corner of the screen. But do what you can in your Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever you use to attack those little guys. Swoosh in for a snack scores 9 points and is next. It's quite a magnificent bird. Looks like a hawk to me, and not one that we necessarily get around here, and that fish certainly doesn't look like anything I've seen. The detail on the bird is good. It looks like the image might have been overly grainy or maybe slightly fuzzy, and it looks like it's been sharpened and noise reduced to try and recover. And for the most part, it's been done really well. In fact, the bird part of the image looks to be nice, and the detail is good. Some of the hot spots in the background around the greenery, you get a little bit of a digital artifact halo effect that I think gives away that you've pushed the editing just a little bit too far. And maybe that's just a matter of going in and backing off the adjustment sliders just a little to bring that back to the realm of what looks like a natural photo and less digital, if you will. There is an S-curve formed by the wings of the bird and then down through the claw and the fish, and I think they do a fairly good job of meeting the theme, and I think it could be said that, like a portrait of a person, and we'll see some of those later, that it does have that back and forth flowing that does make effective use of the S-curve as described, and I think you've done that well. Next we have Sportsman for 9 points. This one certainly has an S-curve, and what I think I like most about this image is that S-curve is probably not planned. I have a feeling that after the game that they were just looking to cross the field and give each other high fives and be done with it. And maybe there's something to be said for the juxtaposition of what might happen in nature, and then here we've got guys wearing football equipment and plastic helmets, and certainly a structured sporting event. The exposure is good and the detail is good, and I think that generally speaking it's a well-made photograph. Taking a Spin at the Fair is next and receives 10 points. I do like the figure 8 that's formed by the Texas Star and this other carnival ride, and I like that you've got the sun behind the car as it's going across the top of the loop, and I do like that as that car comes swooping down, your eye does follow the S as it then kind of goes back up and over the Texas Star, and so I do think that you've got an effective use of the S curve in this image. The shadow detail here is good, and I think it's a well-made photograph. Honorable mention in the intermediate group goes to A River Runs Through It by Jim Walsh, which also earns 10 points. I'm not sure if this is the Grand Canyon or another canyon. This one is obviously beatific, and I think the detail in the rock ledges, both in the foreground and the background and over on the left and the middle ground, are all really well handled. And while the contrast between those three zones is subtle, it is there and it is perceptible, and it does create a sense of depth from front to back, and you do get a feeling that S-curve of the river does lead you from the foreground down towards the bottom of the frame, up through and out the back of the image. And I like that there is a little boat or some other floating structure. The only thing I would say about the image to ding it at all, I think that ledge in the bottom left corner might represent a fourth layer to the image, and that fourth layer may be inadequately represented in the overall scheme of the image, and I think maybe it's the type of thing where either having more of that ledge, and I do like the way that it fits the curve of the bank down below. I think that part was well done, but I think having a more substantial piece of that ledge or finding a way to eradicate it completely would make for a stronger unified image all around. But that's pretty minor. The marvelous aspect of this image is the detail on the rock and the overall exposure, which was handled extremely well here. So congratulations. Valerie Johnson earns third place with her image titled Surviving the Elements with a score of 13. This image right off the bat was one that really stood out, not only for what I believe to be a good use of the S-curve in terms of flowing your eye through the image, but also just in terms of its impact and the way it grabs attention just from a graphical standpoint. I do like monochrome images, and I do think that when you can work within a square format, I always enjoy when people embrace that classic structure, and I think that the vignetting on this image and the dynamic clouds, and I like that ground isn't visible. It looks like this palm tree is just extending way up into the heavens, and you've got this sort of bird for scale, and you get sort of a sense of actually existing. And I could just ramble on and on. This image really is a strong image. The tonality is great, and I do love the sepia tone effect here. And I think it is really well done and deserving of a place up amongst the winners, so congratulations for that. Second place goes to Tin Man by Robin DeRuin with a score of 13 points. The title Tin Man, I believe the actual title of this sculpture down in Deep Ellum is Traveling Man, but I won't hold that against you. You can't photograph this from too many directions and not get that sense of flow with the sculpture itself, and capturing that here with the camera has been done really well here in terms of capturing that S-curve that it shows. The detail is good. You have a deep depth of field here that is almost sharp from the very furthest back all the way to as close as you get to those little rivets down in the bottom right corner of the screen. They're a little soft, but I don't think it's enough to actually detract from the image. I do like the blue cast that you've got here going on. It certainly gives you a feeling that he's reflecting the sky above and that he's up above everything, and what can I say, he's just a lot of fun, and you've captured it well here. Congratulations on second place. This brings us to our first place entry in the intermediate category by Charlie Hinkle and his image titled Antietam Monument with a score of 15 points. There is absolutely nothing I can say about this image in terms of how it might be improved. It really is an extremely well done image. It was taken during the golden hour, that beautiful moment of light. Moreover, though, I think that of all the images that were submitted this month for the S-curve theme, and I'm not talking about just in the intermediate group, I'm talking about all four groups together, this one makes masterful use of the S-curve. Here in the English-speaking world, we read from left to right, and this image certainly travels from left to right, which flows with the natural aspect of the brain. We come in from that left side and go around that monument on the bottom part of the S, and we swing back almost all the way to the left edge of the image before swooping back and just tearing across this beautiful field of wheatgrass or whatever that is, those amber waves, before trailing off to the right edge of the picture. We've got trees sort of along the top edge of that curve, and we've got a nice separation between the golden grass in the bottom portion of the image and the green grass beyond, and the trees and mountain in the background and the sky. Everything here just works really well, and congratulations on your first place position here in the 15 points. You clearly earned both of those. Next up is the advanced group, and we'll begin with the image titled Seductress. Her form on the bench does form an S-curve, and I think you've met the theme well in that regard. The filter effect is interesting, and while I'm not usually a big fan of these, I certainly didn't hold that against you. I do like the way it's kind of applied to the door and the doorknob behind her. It has a very comic book sort of feel to it. I do think that there are a few problems with her pose. I think certainly she's got a seductive look upon her face, though I'm not sure that the low angle is necessarily flattering, or maybe not the exact story that you're wanting to tell, and make sure that you're showing the human form in a way that's flattering. Also, the general advice that I've gotten is that you don't chop off people at their joints, so don't crop them at their ankles or their wrists, knees, elbows, that kind of thing, because it makes for a jarring effect. If you can't show the whole body, or you don't intend to show the whole body of your model, then I think you want to be careful about where you do cut those lines. Next, we have smile for your close-up. Snakes do frequently form S-curves, and this one does have a pretty distinctive S-curve. His face there going down to his neck before it gets to the rest of the snake does form a pretty good S, and then it does sort of snake back towards the back of the picture, and I think your choice to have the head of the snake in focus and the rest of the snake fall off into that shallow depth of field look is fairly effective. I think maybe just a little too much, though. I think it makes the head look a little disjointed and somewhat like it's floating disembodied from the rest of the snake. I think maybe if the focus had been a little deeper so that we got just a little bit of the neck and front part of that snake before it fell off into the background, it would have made for a stronger composition. I forgot to mention at the beginning, but Smile for Your Close-Up also earned 7 points. Next we have Fireplug, which earns a score of 8 points. The title character of this image doesn't have the S-curve, but the sidewalk next to him certainly does. Certainly it has an S shape, and it does lead you from the front of the image deep into the image, from right back to left, and actually works pretty well as a vertical image. I've come down on a number of images in this competition that were vertical and certainly have an opinion about that, but I think it's okay here. I think your exposure is good. I think the detail is good. I think the image might lack a little bit in the impact department, but the image itself undoubtedly is well made, and I think deserving of credit for that. Next we have Along the Water Falling for 8 points. Here we've got what appears to be a Chihuly sculpture, and the ones here do form S-curves, and your model's pose mimics that S-curve, and so I think you've met the theme fairly well. The exposure is good. She does have dark hair, and the shadow detail there is handled well. It's not blocked up. The one piece of advice I would give is to be careful when posing your models. You've got a little bit of her undergarment showing near her armpit, and maybe her armpit in general is not something that's terribly flattering. So watch out for that. In terms of lighting and how it's falling on her face, if you look up in a good photography book or look online, you'll see the different types of lighting patterns that are possible, and in particular look up short lighting versus broad lighting. You've got an example of broad lighting here, and I think you may find that working with short light, and in a case like this might have been as simple as just flip-flopping your model and having it face the other way, I think you'll find that you get a much more pleasing and dramatic lighting effect across the model's face, and it's one of those simple small things that can have a tremendous impact on your image. Up next we have Hiss for 8 points. This one looks to be a bit more nasty than the other snakes. I think this one might actually be poisonous. The S-curve is a little more subtle here than it is with the other snakes and certainly with some of the other images in this competition. But the S-curve is there, and I didn't ding this picture for not having a strong S-curve. The composition does suffer a little bit from being too... I think the snake is too horizontal within the frame. I understand that in a situation where you're photographing a dangerous animal, you don't always get to pick and choose. But I think, generally speaking, if you can have something like a snake forming more of a diagonal leading line through it, even with the S-curve, it tends to be a more pleasing composition. The exposure is good, the color is good. I think the depth of field is handled well. You've got the eye in pretty good sharp focus. You've got a little catch light there. You can see the scales and the gritty little detail on his head where it's important, and so I think that's been handled very well. Great egret is next, which earns 9 points. His neck certainly forms a real strong backwards S, I guess. In addition to the catch light in his eye and being able to see his face, the thing that I really like about this image is the fine fibers off the feathers on the back side of the bird as they kind of jut out from it. I think that really adds a degree of detail. And anytime we see pictures of animals, we like to see those fine details that we don't get to see in real life. So I do think this image succeeds for that. The background is fuzzed out, but maybe not completely fuzzed out, and I think that when you're shooting stuff like this, that can be tricky to get it fully blurred. It looks like maybe the sharpness or, again, the noise reduction has been pushed just a tiny bit too far, and it's made for some digital artifacts and some contrast that may not be there otherwise. So you may go back and revisit this and work with your tone sliders to see if you can't tone down the background just a little bit, and I think it'll help make this photograph feel a lot more natural and look a lot more real. Up next is Peace Lily, which also earned 9 points. The S-curve here is at the same time quite obvious and then really subtle. It begins with this green line in the sort of the middle portion of the main petal, and then actually as it gets to the stem of the flower, actually it's continued by the stem. So you get this elongated S-curve that does run from the top of the picture to the bottom of the picture, and I think that is an excellent example of how an S-curve can be subtle and understated, yet still a significant portion of how an image works. The almost high-key nature of this image also, I think, works really well. I like that the white background isn't completely blown out, and I like that the highlights within the petal are well handled and not blown out. The subtle gradations between the bright values and the shadow values work really well for this image, and I think it was well done. Bear River earns 10 points, and I think is an excellent panoramic photo. We've got some wonderful, looks like half fall color and half spring, or still some summer color. There's still some green left in some of the trees. Maybe those are evergreens. But certainly the oranges and the yellows are an amazing part of this picture. The river does form something of an S-curve as it travels from the front of the image towards the back, and it's certainly the type of S-curve that I like to see when it leads you through the image and adds to the flow, the flow of the image. So I think it works well in that regard too. The bridge in the back is a nice touch, but it does look to be a tad bit crooked, and for all I know, that may be an old rickety bridge that is in fact crooked. The trees look to be looks like there's a little bit of distortion from using a wide angle lens in some of the trees, so I'm not sure really how level it is or how much it might be barrel distortion, but overall really good exposure and really good color and clarity in this image. Warning or bite for 10 points. Here we've got another dangerous snake, looks to be a rattler. Snakes do form S-curves. He does definitely have an S-curve as it snakes away, snakes away back from his head and as it loops around. I wonder if the S-curve he forms is more happenstance or a contributing part of the composition, but nonetheless it is there. And actually I think if you look at him sideways, there's sort of a second S-curve that is a little more broad and does go across the image. So I think you've done fine there with the theme. Certainly you've done an excellent job of capturing the sharpness and detail in the scales on his face and around his tail, and certainly on the little pebbles there in front of him too. Even with a very shallow depth of field, you've managed to get it where it counts, and that's a good thing. So congratulations for that. Next we have Egret by Sam Wilson, which takes third place and earns 10 points. Once again, a bird with an S-curve neck action going on. The S-curve here is actually quite obvious and quite prevalent. Bravo on finding what might be the most pristine example of an S in the contest so far. The white highlights on a white bird, those have been handled extremely well and can be difficult to rein in, so I think you've done a good job there. The clarity on his face is good. The sharpness on his eyes is good. It looks like there's even a tiny little catch light. The tonality of the water behind him is pleasing and well done. I think the out of focus nature of the background is well done. The big rock to the bottom right doesn't add a whole lot to the compositional flow of the image, but it doesn't really detract too much either. I think all around a well executed picture of a bird with an S-curve neck. Into the Wheat Field by Linfen Wang, 12 points and second place. This is an excellent panoramic image, beautiful countryside photo. I love the amber waves of grain in the foreground and the tractor marks that you can see in the field as it fades into the background. The farmhouse and the barns and the trees in the middle ground really are well placed. The S-curve it's there. I mean, it's sort of a combination S-curve, I guess is one way to put it. You've got sort of the beginnings of it with the path that leads from the foreground to the middle ground as it curves over that top of that hill. And then it's almost like it picks up with the curvature of the hills to form the complete S. The sky's not blown. It's a warm sky, but it's got some color there. The hills in the background have some good sharp detail, and overall just an excellent rural panoramic photograph. Well done. Congratulations. Brian Pressman takes first place with his image Dominoes, which earns 13 points. Definitely an S-curve here. Even if it's a deliberate one, it's still an S-curve, and I think it shows that even with common household objects, you can put together the compositional elements that we frequently see in nature. I love the color in the dominoes themselves. I kind of dig the harsh shadow. It looks like you might have lit this with a desk lamp, but it certainly gives it more of a real feel rather than something that was maybe overproduced with studio sort of equipment. The only thing I would offer in terms of commentary is that front domino, that 3 and the 6, is ever so slightly within the field of, or outside of the field of focus. If you look at the sharpness and clarity on the dominoes towards the middle of the curve, the blue ones, for example, those are nice, sharp, crisp, and clean, and the green ones on that front domino are just about there, but not quite. Tweak your focus a little bit, and I think you'll have an even stronger image. Congratulations. The final group we've got is the Master Photographers, and we're going to begin with Low Tide for 8 points. I feel like the S-curve is well represented here. It leads you deeper into the image and snakes your attention back and forth as it does so. Overall, the impact of the image suffers a little from a lack of strong center of focus. I think the S-curve itself may have been the intended subject, but the lack of contrast or differentiation from the surrounding elements works against it. I can see the faint reflections of trees and other elements near the top edge of the image. Had these been more prominent in the image, the S-curve would have led my eye to those reflected elements and might have made for a much stronger image. Next we have Schoolhouse Lane for 9 points. I believe the intended S-curve here is the sidewalk leading up to the schoolhouse. Unfortunately, it's cast in so much shadow that its existence is barely noticeable. I like the night lighting used here, and I think the building is presented in an interesting way. I particularly like the shadow of the tree on the side of the building. For the most part, the perspective looks correct for the building, but something about the area to the right appears to be askew and gives a slanted sensation. Winter Blues, 9 points. The S-curve in this image is well placed and does a trick of leading your eye through the image. For me, the image suffers a little from being too static. A slower shutter speed would have given the kid on the slide some motion blur maybe, and might have led to a more dynamic result. Also, it's a little thing, but watch out for converging lines that can form distractions. In this case, I'm referring to where the standing kid's hat converges with the blue park bench in the background. So watch out for that kind of thing. Havasu Creek, 9 points. The image is in fact well exposed, and there's good sharp detail from front to back. I do believe that there is an implied S-curve in the image. You can see by the rock formations that the river does snake back and forth. Fortunately, I don't think that's enough to suggest that the image adequately meets the theme. It really doesn't have the S-curve in the picture. It's a beautiful exposure, though. I think it would have scored much higher in if it weren't for the theme here. Ruined Mine Engine House for 10 points. I like this image. The sky is nicely handled, and I find that the window showing more sky through the building to be a nice touch. I think the perspective distortion adds to the image rather than taking away, so that's a plus. The S-curve is not quite there. It's so close, though. You can see where the path does sway back to the right and would top off the S-curve, but the camera needed to be positioned just a little bit higher to pull it off. Good image otherwise. Colorado River for 10 points. The lighting and sharpness in the canyon portions of this image are very well done. The golden tones reflected in the river are a key highlight that I think works very well. Here we have an S-curve that is well formed and it leads you through the image as it should. In my opinion, though, the sky portion of the image has a few issues. There's some significant digital artifacting in what should be nice, smooth blue gradients. I can also see a faint highlight of a halo along the edge of the canyon wall, suggesting you either dropped in a sky from another picture, or maybe you tweaked the HDR a little too far, wasn't quite dialed in. Neither technique is necessarily wrong, but they're much more effective if there are no telltale signs of their usage. So watch out for that. Miracle Staircase for 10 points. The spiral flow of stairs does provide a number of examples of S-curves, and some of them are quite strong. Unfortunately for me, it's almost as if there are too many conflicting S-curves and the intended effect is nullified a bit. I am impressed with the clarity, sharpness, and tonal range in this image. This may be one of the best exposures in the group so far. For me, the biggest distraction in the image is the bit of stained glass window in the upper left corner of the image. Looking up at the staircase introduces some perspective issues that I think would be unnoticed or at least not distracting were it not for that chunk of window making them so obvious. Yankee Girl head frame at Red Mountain, 11 points. I'm really impressed with the color in this photo. I've visited some places in Colorado just like this with the mine ruins and what have you, and what I think is about the same time of day, and you've got a warmth and color in the ground that I haven't been able to milk out of my shots. Kudos for that. The S-curve is subtle, but it is there and works well. There's a little bit of artifacting in the sky, but it's a minor issue at best. Great photo. A long drink for 11 points. Anyone that shoots long enough learns that red and orange tones can be a bit challenging at times. It's real easy to blow those red and orange colors out. This photo manages those tricky waters very well. The S-curve is right there front and center and certainly meets the theme for the month. The shadow background portions of the image are indeed dark and push the eye towards the center of interest as they should. They do so while holding on to an impressive amount of detail, so bravo for that. Whooper swans on Lake Kushiro for 12 points. Here we've got some birds who actually, they're not the source of the S-curve. That's a little different for this month. The S-curve is interesting in this image. It's the water as it washes ashore. Is that white sand or is that even snow? I guess that's sand. It does look like a cold scene though. Maybe that is snow. In any case, the S-curve is there. It's the water that leads us right to the important part of the picture, which are the birds. They've got good details. The highlights look a little hot, but it's not anything to be concerned about. The mountains in the background are subtle and have low contrast, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it works well with the high contrast of the birds, and it really just does what it's supposed to do, and it acts as the background of the image, so well done for that. Next we have Great Blue by Larry Peterborg, which earns an honorable mention. Once again, we've got an S-neck bird meeting our S-curve theme. The clarity here is amazing. You can see the individual little strands and fibers of each feather. His face is amazingly sharp, and that's what we like to see when it comes to animals. He's got a catchlight, the beak. It's got some real interesting texture to it. The background is beautifully blurred out, and I think when it comes to the monochrome treatment, we've got an excellent range of tonal values that would make Ansel Adams proud. So I believe this image just overall is really well done and is a really good example of what you can do with an S-curve, and probably one of the better, if not the best, bird examples that we've seen, and there have been several of them this month. Congratulations on honorable mention. Danette Volkner also receives an honorable mention for her image Montana Rustic, which earned 13 points. Here we've got a definite S-curve in the water leading from the lower left corner of the frame up to almost all the way to the barn, certainly up towards the fence. I think if you kind of examine the picture in a more abstract way, you can see that you've also got a real strong S-curve that begins with that little stream and ends with the fence as it trails back to the left side of the image. The water wheel is an interesting element. I think it's well placed in the frame. That red barn certainly is the highlight of the picture and is well handled. The trees in the background have good shadow detail, which is good, and the mountains are handled well as well. So congratulations on what really is just a beatific rural scene out there. Well done. Third place goes to Jose Artiles with his image Red, White, and Blue, which earned 14 points. This image really struck a chord with me, not so much for the patriotic reasons, though it does have a strong patriotic theme. What struck me here is that this image is really unique amongst all the other entries. A photographer here found an S-curve in a format that maybe wasn't as obvious as a stream or a bird's neck or a snake, and photographed it very well. The detail is amazing. It's almost like a macro shot. You can see the woven fiber and the stitching and the little bits where the dye of the star, the blue background sort of meets together. And so I really do think this is an excellent image. It's well composed and the S-curve really works well within it. So congratulations on third place. This is well deserved. Second place goes to Dennis Fritchie for his image Exploring, and represents a scene that I know pretty well. I do like the car up in the upper portion of it. Is that a Ford Explorer? Is that where the title comes from? Regardless of that, the tonal range is amazing. I love the blackness of the black top that contrast is starkly against the, I guess that's desert mountain scrub on either side of the road. And I'm not sure if Dennis used his IR camera for this. I do know Dennis, he's a member of our club, and I've seen some of his work before. But if not, it does have that kind of eerie effect as well. In any case, great image as always, and congratulations on second place. First place goes to John Lehman for his image titled Vintage Portrait. This was hands down